Yeah,
Okay.
that way we can adjust. All right. Hi, everyone.
You're out for some reason.
What? I'm good, right? Everyone can hear me?
Everybody's frozen to me.
No, everyone's not in for me. So that's you, Steve. I'm
Yep.
Sky
I can hear
with
you.
PoliticsNY. And now we have 3 candidates on the screen here. I've spoken with 2 out of the 3 candidates for my 3 questions and 3 minutes interview series. So Adolfo, you're up next. We got to make a date, but it's fun. So that's what we're doing here on PoliticsNY. It's part of Schneps Media. Steve Witt on the screen is the editor-in-chief, and I'm the queen of fun. So with these debates, we want to keep them light and fun. And the really idea here is that a lot of people aren't able to have candid conversations. That's what I do in my 3 questions in 3 minutes. But with these debates too, it's hard if I just ask Adolfo to answer a question and then that's it. And then I ask Fernando to answer a question and that's it, especially with just 3 of you, if no one else joins. We can keep it kind of conversational. That way we can really get into it a little bit with each other and figure out who's the best candidate for Council District 14. So with that, welcome everyone. Welcome to our live audience. Welcome to PoliticsNY with Sky. Schneps Media is the only media outlet providing a platform for every single candidate running for New York City office to have their voice heard and show their faces and personalities. Today's debate will be fun and fast, unlike the other debates that a lot of council candidates are subject to. So just try and keep your answers short and sweet. And no one has the attention span after all these Zoom events. So we'll keep it short and sweet for that reason. It's being recorded, this whole Zoom series. So you can watch it on politicsny.com, see all of our debates and upcoming debates, recordings of previous debates on politicsny.com/debates. So anyway, here we are. These candidates are competing for New York City Council District 14, which is in the Northwest Bronx. It includes Morris Heights, University Heights, Fordham, and Kingsbridge. It's a seat held by Fernando Cabrera. He's running for Bronx Borough President. So it's an open seat. And we have with us these 3 candidates so far. And if any other candidates are out there, please raise your hands and I will allow you in to be on the screen as a panelist. So let's just get started. Let's go in order with last name first, alphabetical. So we'll start with Adolfo. Or you want to go backwards? We can go backwards for fun because we have 2 A's and an S. So you want to start with Pierina? Let's start with Pierina then. Give us your little elevator speech of a little bit about your background and why you're running for office. And we'll start with Pierina and then we'll do Fernando and then Adolfo.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Am I good to go?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for organizing this. There aren't many opportunities for all of us to be in a space and have our voices heard. So saludos, me llamo Pierina Sanchez. It is an honor to be here with you. I am running for City Council District 14 in the Bronx, where I was born and raised. Right. I was born and raised to a family of resilient Dominican immigrants who came here and have been fighting for as long as I can remember for every little bit that we have. Actually, one of my earliest memories is of waking up in the middle of the night to the strong smell of smoke, of fire. And all I remember is my mom yelling and screaming for me and my brothers to get up and get out of the building. And the story that I'm sharing with you is my very first experience of tenant harassment. See, my mom and my tias didn't have heat, didn't have hot water, and they figured out that there was this organization called Legal Aid Society, and they went over there for help, and the landlord retaliated against them in this way. And 30 years later, the details have changed, but unfortunately, the abuses of power have not really changed. And I am who I am because these strong women that I grew up looking at, right, because of what they instilled in me, right? I went to public schools. I, was so fortunate to be able to benefit from public programs that helped me to get into Harvard University for undergrad and Princeton, and then go on to intern in the White House and work in the mayor's office. But every single step of my path, always living here, right? The very first thing that I did when I finished college was I came back home to District 14 and worked in the in constituent services here in the council office. And so every step of my path as I've climbed and clawed and fight many times to be the only person that looks anything like me in a room, in a space, as I fought to be in those spaces, I've always stayed here and made sure to bring the resources back and to make sure to bring any lessons back and fight here on the ground in the community. And so with that, I'll keep it short. I'll keep it short because this is all about brevity. But I want to thank you and just emphasize again that for me, I'm glad to be in a race with so many candidates that have deep ties to the communities, which you'll hear about. And I'm very glad to be also rooted in the experiences of fighting for public policies that benefit our community and have experience in doing that and hitting the ground running as a city council member. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierina. Let's hear from Fernando next, another Dominicano.
Yes, I think all of us are Dominican.
Oh, you're all Dominican?
All of the candidates, yes.
Wow.
Everybody knows how to dance merengue here.
Maybe you could teach me.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Sky and Steve. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you to Pierina and Adolfo. This is a great opportunity for us to continue to discuss these important issues. I am Fernando Aquino, and what you see here is a product of hard work, education, and civic participation. I was born in the Dominican Republic, and in a sugarcane field surrounding what the closest thing to slavery that you're going to find. My father used to work for the sugarcane industry. My mother is a domestic worker also. A farmer, and then the values that have guided me here are based on hard work, education, and civic participation. I started my civic participation in the student movement in the Dominican Republic, and I went to a lot of towns in the Dominican Republic, fighting for justice, helping workers, and then I migrated to the United States as any other migrant looking for a better life. I came to New York, and I continued to pursue my education here. I went to Hostos Community College and to City College, then to the Graduate Center. Now I'm teaching at Lehman College, and I'm also been working for government and in journalism. I was the political reporter for El Diario, Room 9, for several years. Then after that, I went to work for the New York State Senate, when the Senate was actually working to get back the Senate into Democratic power. Because we had a long time with Republican power, and then I was part of that group that got in there with David Paterson to get the Senate back into Democratic hands. And from then, I actually went to work for the New York Mets. I see there are some Mets fans here. In the final year at Chase Stadium, and I was the director of market development for the Mets. That was a very exciting year. But I came back to politics and government and spend the next 10 years working for the Attorney General's office as a spokesperson. That gave me a big experience how government works, because the Attorney General's office is not about just punitive actions. It's also about policy making. One thing that I can correlate is that the poverty that I escaped from the Dominican Republic, I found here in the Bronx. A lot of people who work for a living cannot afford to pay their rent. And that's a governmental failure. And that is why I'm running. I believe that a lot of groups that came to build what we have here in the Bronx, build this alternative economy, building bodegas, driving taxis, building supermarkets, where no one wanted to go to those places, are being left behind. The government of New York City only know how to regulate those industries, but doesn't know how to help them. So that is why I'm running. I think that this group in these communities are now well represented in government, and that's my intention in going to City Hall.
Thank you, Fernando. And last but not least, Adolfo.
Audio's good?
Adios.
Perfect. I tend to always go first because of alphabetical order in schools, so it feels good to mix it up. But I'm Adolfo Abreu. Lived in this district all my life, 28 years. Son of a single Dominican mother in the Bronx who did everything just to make sure that her and I could survive in the Bronx, knowing full well how difficult it is for immigrant and working families just to be able to thrive in these communities. And my mom was working as a home health aide in the 90s, making $4.50 an hour, expected to have food on the table, expected to pay the bills, and more importantly, having to expect to be paying the rent. And by the time I was 13, We had moved 4 different times because of affordability issues and her wages not being able to keep up for us to stay in one stable home. I also went to schools in PS 86 in the 90s when it was overcrowded, and there was young people like myself that there was not a seat for me in my own school. And I had to be bused to a school in the South Bronx. And I didn't get to see the main campus of PS 86 until the 2nd grade. And I mention all of that because it wasn't until I joined a community-based organization when I was 11 years old that I realized that our neighbors, immigrant working class, Black and brown folks in the Bronx, were struggling in a multitude of ways, whether it was with housing, health, education, employment. If there was an issue, you named it, I think the Bronx probably suffered it, and our people were trying to figure out how to navigate and survive. But it was with that organizing community that I learned that through our collective action, through our collective visions, through our collective imagination, that we can transform these systems to make it work for us in our communities, so that we can own our housing, so that our schools will not have to be overcrowded, and all our teachers and students have all the resources and attention that they need to thrive. So that's why I'm in this race, because I know that the last 13 years we've had a type of representation that I think could be better for our communities here, especially in the district that has had the highest eviction rates before the pandemic, and right now has the highest eviction rate filings across the city. So I think for us, we have to do more. And even in conversations with people out in the streets and out there, people want to see consistency from their elected officials, people who are going to be on the ground. And as a community organizer, I'm ready to do this, to govern together with my community, to just tackle all these systems that are holding us back, and making sure that we have a government that centers the voices and the aspirations of our people through legislation, through budget, and all the decision-making that a council member will make.
Thank you, Adolfo, and thank you everyone for telling us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for office. And all 3 of you are Dominicanos. So if at any point you want to start hablando en español, we can do that, because hablo un poquito español. And Steve, do you habla español too?
No entiende.
But I know that the voters hablan español. So if at any time, just please, whip out.
I know, we have a reporter who's Dominican. I feel like inviting him in.
We could do Spanglish, whatever you want, whatever you're.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's start in English. What, all 3 of you, one at a time, when you get to City Hall, what is the #1 issue that you would like to tackle in the district? I mean, what's the top of your priority list?
We can start with Pierina.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on day one, I have about 20 ideas, but if I had to pick one, it would have to be to tackle the way that inequality in our community is manifest, right? The inequality in our community is manifest in many, many ways, but what you hear the most is the housing crisis, right? It is, I'm behind on my rent. It is, there's so many issues in my apartment. It is all of these ways that our housing quality is not up to par, and even for folks who are in their home, they're falling behind. So for me, I think about that in terms of tackling that inequality, and I would introduce legislation to ensure that more of our housing is going toward home ownership, right? That we are supporting community land trust, that we are supporting cooperative ownership models, that we're supporting community ownership, nonprofit control, so that we're expanding, we're tackling the issue, not just by stemming the bleeding that is happening now, which we absolutely have to do. We have to cancel rent. We have to deal with the problems today. But I would start off by making a statement. We got to take the long view. We got to tackle inequality. And the way that we do that is that we dedicate more of our affordable housing production resources to affordable homeownership opportunities.
Thank you. Fernando.
Well, governmental failure has made it clear that the preconditions that existed before the pandemic have only been exacerbated by the pandemic. The Bronx was behind on everything before the pandemic, on unemployment, housing, the environment, etc. Now, you need to prioritize things, and on day one, I will be prioritizing things that are related to the effect of the pandemic in relation to helping people stay in their houses, stay in their homes. First of all, because we do have the highest eviction rate in the city, and also helping small business stay in business. making sure that they get the resources that they're supposed to get, the resources that other businesses are getting elsewhere. And then we need to tackle the structural problems, starting with housing. We need to change the area income formula that we use to calculate affordable housing, because the one that we're using right now is not working because we lump them together. Rich neighborhood with poor neighborhood, we need to hyper localize that formula so we can actually help people who need help, people who work for a living and cannot afford to pay the rent. So those are areas in which we need to work immediately. We also need to work in helping unemployed and underemployed youth, particularly women, to get the proper training to get to work. And we can partnership with small businesses and with community colleges to help them to have language training if they need that, because muchas de nuestra gente no habla inglés y necesita que le enseñemos a hablar inglés, y tenemos los recursos para hacer eso. Entonces, those are areas who are going to empower people who have never been prioritized in this city.
Thank you. Adolfo, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with when we're talking about the addressing the housing crisis, right? I agree on the affordability mechanisms, right? And ensuring that when it comes to development, we're being as aggressive as we can in ensuring that these developments are being built throughout the district are affordable, right? Because there's people who live in our communities who are rent burdened, who are seeing new development being built and thinking that it's affordable housing when we see the listings, they can't apply. So I think we have to balance that and push for that. But I also, and in addition to also the vision of social housing in terms of community land trust or the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, something that's been like in my mind is the fact that we haven't had a real conversation about the fact that, with due reason, we've been, staying at home. But there's some of our neighbors who have had to stay at home under leaks and mold, other lack of repair issues that haven't been addressed, right? There's some management companies and supers that have taken this opportunity to not do as many repairs. And with due reason, right? Some of them are trying to be mindful of exposing their workers and doing repairs, and have only been prioritizing quote unquote, very extenuating repairs, emergency repairs. But right now, as we come back, quote unquote, to normal, we have to work with HPD to guarantee that we're doing inspections, because there's a lot of our neighbors who we know that if they are currently in their homes with leaks and molds, that leads to other negative outcomes, whether it's, especially if they're asthmatic, right? That may lead them to the emergency room, or just other negative indices. Like, for instance, our Department of Sanitation budget was cut. A lot of people are noticing a spike in terms of rodent infestations in their buildings and in their communities. So we have to really take this also health and holistic approach to when we're thinking about enforcement of housing. And guaranteeing that those repairs are done, because we want to make sure that our community members are still healthy. And we really want to make sure that this year, this crazy year that we've all experienced, it doesn't have long-lasting health effects, especially for communities like ours in the Bronx.
I just want to maybe follow up or push back or something. I've done a series of stories about HDFCs. And when you say, I don't know if there's HDFCs in your community, but I've heard from a lot of HDFC co-op owners that said they were sold a bad bill of goods, that a lot of these nonprofit developers came in, promised them home ownership, and they weren't able to get any equity or very little equity. They weren't able to pass it down. And the nonprofit developers got 0% interest from HPD and to redevelop. And then they would actually move the tenants out of the co-op. They would get a 10% management fee. And, sometimes you hear nonprofit development, but are you concerned that the actual tenants that have done this program 20 years ago are now being moved out, then be moved in again or moved around? And do you think there might be a better method of providing nonprofit development? Like I've always found nonprofit developers also do foreclosure counseling. I always thought that's a natural conflict of interest. I mean, it's like they learn what's wrong and then they take over the building. So I guess my question to you is does that have a concern? Do you see any oversight for the role over nonprofit developers and more insurances so people that do own co-ops through HDFCs can actually build equity? And how would you address that?
We can, yeah. Want to go in reverse order this time for fun?
Okay.
Adolfo.
No, let's do it that
Sorry,
way.
it was a long question, but
Yeah, no. I was wanting to see how you wanted to, take the turn here. Look, I think when it comes to the question on oversight, I think our failure in terms of like government and how we've approached the situation is, we may have sold our tenants and our neighbors and say, look, you can now own this, you can buy it for $1, and then expected them to do this themselves, right? Not explaining that there are certain bills attached to it, whether it's the water bill or the property tax. And I think when it comes to the oversight piece, we have to guarantee that there's technical assistance, right? So that our neighbors are equipped with the process of how to, like, now that you own it, this is what it means, right? This is the steps that you need to take, but also supporting them in their own leadership development, because more often than not, you have neighbors who, it happens, right? People who are not able to communicate amongst each other. And there's those tensions that arise. You might have a board and then the rest of the owners and people questioning like, well, is the board on top of this? Do they know what they're doing? I think we need to support that so that folks have that line of communications, because multiple HDFCs, you've seen some issues where there might be some board members, right, who maybe folks aged out or folks just like stopped paying attention. And then there's a new election and then some new leadership came in and was able to get the support to right the ship. Or there's another HDFC, there was a whole different other situation going on based off the composition of who lives in the building. But I think more often than not, the issue here is that we just can't say, now you own it, now you get to figure it out. The role of the city government, especially a city council member, is to continually monitor and support the HDFC members or any other entity that has ownership, and have constant conversations with HPD just to guarantee that we don't have to do extenuating circumstance of having to increase the amount that we pay because the rent roll cannot support the bills, right? And I think if we are constantly on top of it, then we can mitigate crises unlike the ones that we saw a couple of years ago. And I'm pretty sure my colleagues can even add to more horror stories of all the HDFCs that are in this council district.
is there a lot of HDFCs in the district?
Yeah, there's a good number. There's a good number. And I would just add to what Adolfo said is, right, we have to start with the reckoning that there's a problem when 96% of the folks who live in our community, 96% of our households are renter households. That is in comparison to a 30% rate of homeownership anywhere else in the city, 30 to 40%. And yet we only have a 4% rate of homeownership, right? And that is because of our history of blocked access to wealth building opportunities. We didn't get loans in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, right? When FHA was giving out loans. Our communities, when we somehow managed, right? Our African-American ancestors, right? When they somehow managed to get their hands on our properties, experienced redlining that depreciated their property values, experienced blockbusting, right? And so when we talk about homeownership, we have to make sure that we remember what is it that we're holding on to. We're holding on to the fact that there is an injustice in property ownership in this country, in this state, in this city. And the way that we rectify that is that we produce homeownership opportunities. And what you're talking about with HDFCs, right? What you're talking about, what Adolfo is talking about with HDFCs that were handed this property for $1 and then said, go forth and dance with like no support whatsoever. And then like shunned when things started to go wrong, right? That I completely agree with. We have to provide technical assistance, but we overall the big picture is the fact is that we're fighting inequality. The fact is that we're fighting this blocked access, and the way that you do that is you say, this is my mission statement. We're gonna erode that, and the way that we're gonna erode that is we're gonna figure out the best way to build equity in communities of color, right? We're gonna figure out how it is to make that work here, because we haven't done that. We haven't done that as a city. We haven't done that as a state or a nation.
Well, not-for-profits are not exempt from corruption, and particularly in the housing market in New York City, which is competing with the rest of the world. There's going to be a lot of pressure. And I think this is an example of governmental failure of creating these programs who are hybrid non-for-profit or not-for-profit in itself. And without the proper oversight to follow up. You know, when I worked for the Attorney General's office, we had a lot of cases related to not-for-profit corruptions. And I think when you create this type of program, you need to create the proper oversight to follow, you know, up 5 years later, 10 years later, and not just be put your hands on your head when you see that the situation didn't work. So housing has been and will continue to be the #1 problem in New York City, and government need to put that in the cardboard in front of everybody's computer, because we are competing with the rest of the world. There's a lot of money in the world, a lot of people who own real estate in New York City, but New York City needs a workforce that sustain the city moving, and that workforce is the workforce that live in places like ours, like here in the Bronx, renting, and they cannot afford to pay the rent. So government needs to, you know, step up to the task and start making decisions that are favorable to the people who need the help from the government. So I believe that has been a big failure, another big failure in government. And if you add that to the bending that the real estate industry have been able to do to our governmental system, then you know that the working class in this city has just been left to survive however they can in terms of housing. And I think that needs to change. I think, and the next city council needs to definitely take housing as the main priority and tackle that problem once and for all.
So we talked about this housing issue, and it seems like there are a lot of things that the three of you can agree on. So I'd like to really identify things that maybe you don't agree on. And I'd like to do that by having each of you ask someone else a question and, you know, maybe challenge them a little bit. So we'll have a little fun that way. So Fernando, you want to go first? Ask
Well,
a question.
one of the things that I would say is that we may agree in a lot of things, but we don't represent the same things. One of the problems that we have had here in the Bronx is that, you know, we have been getting a lot of people elected by outside sources, outside forces that come here to impose certain people because those people fit their criteria or fit their agenda. I think that's how I came to be a different candidate to this, because I'm only beholden to the people of the community. And I believe that if you belong to the establishment, which is already governing the city, you know, and is failing the city, and you are representing those forces, I don't think you are a genuine force for change in this race.
So
Is there a question that you want to ask, or are you making an accusation, perhaps?
Would you say, who do you represent really in this race?
And you're asking who? Both
Yes.
your opponents?
Okay.
You both work in government right now, Adolfo and Pierina, if I say it right.
You can keep yourselves off mute, really. It could just be a
Yeah.
conversation if you'd like. Yeah.
Sorry, it's just my neighbor, like, has been playing the same song for the last, like, 45 minutes. I'm just trying to spare y'all. Like, I know when you like a song that you, like, want to listen to, but now it's just getting to me. So that's why I've been on mute, but I'll keep it off.
Yeah, and I got a cat who is very loud. Yeah, so the question was, do I work in government right now?
Who do you represent in this race? I mean, who is behind your candidacy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, for me, born and raised in the community, right? You know, started my campaign in June of 2020 with just the core group of neighbors and friends and family around us. And, you know, we're able to really kick off such a strong grassroots campaign with nearly 1,000 contributions received just within those first 4 weeks, which I raise only as an example of how much excitement there is for change here in the community, and how much, you know, how much work that I've done during this campaign, starting with that month, but continuing on. You know, probably done 90 community events at this point, met so many thousands and thousands of people and had so many conversations. And I represent those folks, right? I represent my neighbors, whether or not they vote, right? Whether or not they are on that prime, double prime, right? You know, there's all this traditional guidance that you get as a candidate for what to focus on. And for me, it's been incredible that the silver lining of running a campaign during COVID-19 has meant that I've connected with so many more people. And so those folks, the folks who are behind on their rent, who are terrified about what comes next, whose kids didn't have a device for the first 6 months of remote learning, right? Those are the folks that I'm running to represent. And I'm so proud that during all of this work, right? During all of this work that we've been doing on the ground, that folks have taken notice and that we've been able to garner support from a broad coalition of stakeholders. But it's about my community. It's about our neighbors. That is who I'm running to represent. And that is, you know, who I am from and what I am for.
Oh, you wanna?
Yeah, to add on to that, you know, I've also like, you know, I think Pierina mentioned this in the beginning, the majority of the candidates here, you know, I think when we're campaigning, a lot of us can there's a lot of things that we have to do in terms to like validate ourselves. And I think that whole system of validation is just rooted in a lot of notions of privilege, right? So that you might have some people who say, I am the community candidate. And that's why I'm going to be the strongest one. And that's why you have to back me. But, you know, Council District 14 is such a beautiful community. It is very diverse. It's very small. It can be very microscopic, right? Like I've been in my silo, in my organizing community for the last 17 years, right? There might be other people in this call who were like all about their community board, all about like one particular neighborhood within the council district, and that's fine, right? Because I think that's how expansive, that's how beautiful, that's how diverse this council district is. And for myself, it's those 17 years of organizing in this community. I'm pretty sure some of my fellow candidate colleagues and others probably have run into someone on the door who's like, oh, I've known him since he was 11. And you're like, oh my God, another person. So I think that's like the expansive network of people who I've built with, also familial networks, right? Like, because as you've been mentioned, we're Dominican and those networks run deep. A lot of folks who might be able to vote, might not be able to vote, but live in this community and have also visions for change of how leadership should look like in this neighborhood. So that's who I'm accountable to as well. That organized tradition of those folks in the community, those familial networks, alongside just other stakeholders that decided to endorse me, right? I think there's been a lot of endorsements in this race. And I think at the end of the day, what's critical about having people elected into office is that when we're pushing our pieces of legislation, when we're fighting for the budget, we know that we're going to come at a point where there's going to be forces who don't agree with us. We're going to stop us. We're going to say, no, you can't do this. And I think for me, is leaning into that organized community, leaning into my people in this council district and knowing that I'm representing them and making sure that we're standing into those values. Because more often than not, when the going gets tough, you have some people who go with the flow and then tell the community, sorry, this is what I was able to get for you. When in reality, it's like, no, our people want us to consistently disrupt because we've been just sick and tired of like getting those same old responses.
So Adolfo, now, do you have a question for your colleagues on the screen?
Yeah, I was thinking about it in terms of the housing question, and Fernando threw this nice little curveball, so I appreciate it. But I think I was thinking, wanted to just have a conversation about shelters, right, in this district, right? There is, like, how do we balance, right, the need for a shelter system, but at the same time, trying to get across to the vision of more permanent supportive housing, knowing full well that in our districts, especially our district, we have done more than our fair share than other parts of the Bronx and other parts. So how will we, how will you approach that in terms of being the next council person? If the next mayoralty is like, we're gonna bring 20 shelters into the district, what you gonna do?
Who was that to Fernando?
Both of them? Okay.
I can start.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, I think we can never run away from problems. I think we are all in this together, and I think shelters can be viewed as a problem for certain neighborhoods. I am a homeowner. I came from the Detroit cane fields, but I've been able to afford to buy a home, and I have been living here with my family for 17 years, and I do have a shelter halfway house right next to my house, and I have never confronted any problems with them. So I do believe that what we need to do is to work to get people who need help for permanent housing to get permanent housing, but at the same time we need to deal with people who don't have a place to live. So I think we need to find a balanced approach to allow people be in shelters which are temporary situations, and make sure that they're not going to be disruptive to the neighborhoods. But definitely we need to be humane about this issue, and we need to create those conditions and protect the people who need protection temporarily, and also protect the people who are in the surroundings. And so I think there should be a balanced approach to this, and a humane and balanced approach. What I do also believe is that everybody needs to do the fair share. You know? These temporary shelters cannot just be thrown into one particular neighborhood, because that particular neighborhood don't have anybody who's going to cry out and who is going to have a voice in City Hall. You know, one of the problems that we have, and that was related to my question, is that when we go to City Hall, the way the city has been operating is like people gang up to certain groups, and when they go over there, they have their hands tied, because there have been preconceived policies by the stakeholders that are behind those candidacies. And sometimes I think we in New York need is some, like Adolfo said, some disruption. We need some independent voices there. Some people can speak up, because sometimes it's not just voting for something. It's also having a powerful, respectful voice to say the things that need to be said, and not to just be pleasing those interests that took you there. And you see that a lot. You see a lot of that in New York City, you know, when they're going to elect a speaker, you know, oh, let me see what the people of the Bronx are going to do. Let me see what the people of the Queens are going to do. You know, we need to break that cycle. And the way we're going to do it is by electing independent people, because the situation is already bad. So that goes to the shelter situation also, because we can have then a balanced approach with independent leadership, so we can say the things that need to be said to the New York City public.
Thank you. And Pierina, let's get your thoughts on that question, and then you ask a question to your colleagues.
I ask a question. No, I think, I think this is one of the toughest one for all of us, right? Especially in our community, right? I am somebody who has been participating for many years on Community Board 5, but, you know, back 10, 11 years ago, when I first came back from college, participating with 7, 8, 4. And I think, fundamentally, we have to start with our value statement when it comes to the homelessness crisis, when it comes to shelters, right? And that value statement for me is that housing is a human right, and that all human beings, every single human being is dignified, right? Is worthy of being treated with dignity, right? And so for me, I'm an urban planner by background, by training, and I think about, as both have raised, is that you run a fair share analysis, right? You run a fair share analysis that says certain uses, right? Certain land uses shall be distributed equally across the city of New York, so that no one community is benefiting too much or hurting too much, right? And so you run a fair share analysis, and as both have mentioned, right, we are certainly overrepresented in the number of shelters we have. We're certainly overrepresented in the amount of challenges that we have in this community in general. And so for me, it is about working across the city of New York with all other 50 council members to make sure that everyone is sharing in the work of uplifting the dignity of all of our neighbors, whether they have happened to become homeless or they live with different challenges or whatever the case may be. but then we have to take a comprehensive approach, right? We have to take a comprehensive approach. So I am a big proponent of a comprehensive planning for New York City, not one that is top down, that is a bunch of agencies getting together and telling the city what needs to be done, but one that is from the bottom up also, right? So we're meeting in the middle, we have the recommendations from the top, we have the recommendations from the bottom, and we're making sure to analyze all of the needs of our city: transportation, infrastructure, parks, open space, schools, housing, number of housing units, all of this stuff, number of shelter beds, where they're sited, all of that. So we're taking a comprehensive look at where everything is in the city, where our gaps are, and where we need to go from there. Because when you do that, when you take a big comprehensive look at what the situation is across the 5 boroughs, then you can say, okay, this is where we need to emphasize building shelter beds. This is where we need to emphasize, look at how overcrowded the schools are in X and Y and Z place, and so on and so forth. So for me, my approach to shelter siting is to continue to promote a comprehensive planning process for the city of New York, but to make sure that dignity and housing as a human right is at the center for how we come up with solutions.
Okay, thank you. And now a question from you, Pierina, to your colleagues.
Right. So this one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is, some of the realities that we face, which with respect to our civic engagement, activism levels here in the community. We know that we have some of the lowest voter turnout in the city of New York. We know that when we knock, right, and when we make calls, we get a lot of folks who are just like, I'm tired of this, I don't even want to talk to you, right? Because they're so sick of what has come before and all of the broken promises that there have been in the past. So my question for both of you is, how do you plan to work together on education on ranked choice voting, in the near term and just in terms of this race, but more broadly, what is your plan for changing that around for this community? How can we work together, win or lose?
Good one. Please feel free to jump in.
I can go first if you.
Okay.
I think ranked choice voting is a great idea. I think the results are going to be very beneficial long term for the city. But one of the things that I'm seeing a lot during this process is that something that I think runs contrary to what the concept of ranked choice voting is trying to achieve, which is this partnerships, like I'm number one, you're number two, you're number two, you're number one. So like basically another way to telling people who to vote for. I think it is fantastic to tell people now you have 5 choices in order of preference, right? You should consider me as your number 1 choice, but you should know that you do have other choices here, and try to create that space for the voters to decide how to approach this and who they're going to vote for based on their knowledge of the candidate, the candidate's platform. I think what needs to happen for that is that the city needs to invest more money in educating our voters. Hay que educar a nuestra gente sobre cómo votar, porque ahora pueden votar por 5 opciones y no necesariamente tratar de imponerle una plancha a la gente de vota por este uno, vota por este el dos, porque eso estaríamos lo mismo. We are doing the same thing if we're trying to impose, this one, this two, this three. So I know candidates are going to try to make these arrangements, and I do believe it's very beneficial for us to have these conversations, because one of the things that has been, taken away from this, I hope, from this process is, the bitterness and the dirty tricks and all these things that are not necessarily, that do not contribute to empower our communities, honestly. But I do think that voters should have freedom to decide who do they want to vote for in order of preference.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is like legislatively. I know that recently Albany has made it easier for those who They codify protections for those who are on parole to be able to participate again in the democratic process. So I think making sure that we're staunchly defending the rights of every person in New York City, New York State, to be able to participate. And I think two pieces of legislation that I think are feasible. It's, lowering the voting age to 16 and making it so more that our young people can be involved in the democratic process at a younger age, and making sure that we're coupling that with just a robust civic education, processes and programs in our schools, so that our young people feel equipped and prepared to be able to, one, make decisions, but also to be able to have their voices heard on what issues they really care about and want to see reflected. Second, I know a lot of us are probably in agreement that we want to make sure that non-citizens, folks who are green card holders, who live in the city, who pay taxes, who do everything, who hold this city up, their voices can also be heard, and they can elect their next council person, because all of us, whoever wins, will be making decisions that will impact their day-to-day. They should have a say as to, well, Adolfo's not doing a good job, I'm gonna not vote for him next time, as an example. And I think there's certain models that we can also institute in terms through our governance. And I think I mentioned this before. There's model participatory budgeting, right? I think there's certain tweaks that we can make to that model. And this council district hasn't had that. Other council districts in the Bronx and the city have had participatory budgeting. I think is one of the best ways to just engage our neighbors in a conversation about what are some of the things that they'll like to see improved in their neighborhood. So I think it's possible to do that. Second, as neighborhood assemblies is something that I thought about. How can we invite people into learning what the legislative process looks like, identifying policy fixes, because sometimes it's someone on the street who might be like, hey, what about this? And you're like, wow, I don't think no one's thought about it. So let's work together, figure out how we can turn that into a piece of legislation. I mean, I think that's going to be critical, because more often than not, our people don't know who their representatives are, what they can and cannot do. And I think that would be helpful to kind of know, like, this is what Adolfo can do if I go to his office. And if not, I know Adolfo will help me get to the right location, or to the right agency, to the right person that can help me troubleshoot this issue. And lastly, I think we just have to figure out how we shift what I would call the transactional nature of like our campaigning. And I think I would love to, as council member, continue knocking on doors. So I'm just gonna knock on a door, and a door is gonna open. I'm like, hey, I'm your council member. And she'll be like, so when's the election? I'm like, well, the election isn't until 2 years from now. I'm just here to talk to you. Is there anything that I can help you with? And I think people are tired of just only seeing us or aspiring candidates to be when it's voting time. I think they're yearning for that interaction with their elected leaders.
When you talk about engaging the community, I think a lot of times voters like to base their vote on a candidate by seeing who the candidate aligns themselves with. And one of the questions actually that came in from our live audience right now, who's watching this debate, is what is your opinion of Mayor DeBlasio? Good or bad, and why? So let's do that question. And then I know Steve has another question. So I want to fit in those two questions in the next 9 minutes. So try and be quick with your answer. And maybe let's begin with you, Pierina.
Great. I think I'm very qualified to answer this question as a former staffer. So yeah, I mean, I would say about Mayor DeBlasio is that, first of all, I'm thankful for having been a senior advisor in the mayor's office. I was able to see so much, to be a part of some critical negotiations, like, getting a prevailing wage for building service workers, right? And ensuring that, taxi drivers are able to earn more, right, in this critical time that they were already seeing diminished wages. We had some landmark legislation for hire vehicles in 2018. I would say that, Mayor DeBlasio has been governing during a very difficult moment in history. I would not have handled the Black Lives Matter protests and NYPD relations in the way that he did. But ultimately, I think that as we look to the future, I hope for a future mayor that is going to be centering people power, that is going to be really truly re-envisioning public safety in the city of New York, and that is going to be truly giving voice to communities in all of the processes that we have, whether it's comprehensive planning or it's community plans or it's neighborhood land use and negotiations, or whatever the case may be. That's what I hope for the future.
Adolfo, let's hear from you next.
Yeah, I think I'm excited and ready to have new governance in the city of New York. Just because I think for us, we want to make sure that we're electing a mayor who's ready, like similar to what Pierina said, that it's ready to roll up their sleeves, engage in conversation with the majority of stakeholders, and making sure that we're advancing and solving all the crises in the city, and particularly in the Bronx, right? We always get left behind. I think it's sad that we always have to make sure to remind people that we're here and that we're not just a forgotten borough, that we really need sizable investments and meaningful partnerships with all the city agencies and just someone at the mayoralty, and not have to consistently hold them accountable just to get them to shift where they need to be. So I think I'm just looking forward to new leadership in City Hall that would just be ready to dig in, and that this new city council doesn't have to stand up to them as much, right? Stand up to where we need to, but on critical issues, we need a partner.
And Fernando, your thoughts on Mayor DeBlasio?
When it comes to the Bronx, it's hard to think of anything major that DeBlasio did for us. But that is just, let's say, like a side point within the overall overall evaluation of the DeBlasio administration. I mean, DeBlasio was, it seems like he was never focused on the job. It seems like he got in there and immediately started thinking about running for president. And I think that's one of the things that New Yorkers were pissed about, because New York City mayor is one of the toughest jobs in the world, and politically speaking, probably even more difficult than being governor. And he didn't want the job, because he was pursuing another job. Immediately he got, reelected. And I think that has a huge impact in morale in the city. And, his relationship with the police department has also been, I think, mismanaged. I think his relationship with Governor Cuomo has also been a problem for the city, particularly during this pandemic. And I don't blame just this solely on the Mayor DeBlasio, because I know that Governor Cuomo is also responsible for this, but the two of them, were, just playing like kids in a playground, for a piece of candy, when the city needed leadership. So, I don't think he deserves a pass. I think he did not show the leadership that New York City needs. And I hope that the next mayor understands that and shows that leadership. And I'm going to the city council. I don't know who the mayor is going to be, but I'm going to do my job as a city councilman. And I'm going to represent this area with dignity. And I think we need more from whoever the mayor is going to be.
Thank you. Steve, did you have another question? Because I saw one that came in. I know we only have 5 minutes left.
Maybe you can give it, but because this is a little off topic, but I'm going to mention it. Ruben Diaz Sr., there's a large Latino population. They're older generation, more religious, more conservative. And, he made a statement. I think they might have been a resolution to censor him, that, about the LGBT community. And how do you feel, how will you represent the older, more conservative, religious Dominican people in your community? What do you say to them? Do you think they should be censored? You think Ruben Diaz should be censored for his thoughts? Are you familiar with Ruben Diaz Jr., the senior, the dad?
I think we all are. Look, I'd say there's a different, like when there are people in power, we have to talk about accountability, right? And any of us who get into office, if we were to say something that is rooted, that it's not rooted in, is not coming from a place of love or just liberation, there needs to be some sort of accountability measure, right? Now, if I were to engage with a voter on the street who has those same sentiments, right? My thing is like, I'm not gonna say, well, stop, I'm not gonna talk to you, you cannot talk, right? I think that's more like, how can we find that commonality in the struggle? How can we just pivot that person to see, well, this is this is our neighbors, right? That we need to stand in solidarity with, right? I'm not asking you to change your opinion, but just to think about how we can just love and make sure that we're affirming the existence of those who might be different than us in our society. But when it comes to folks who are in positions of power, we have to figure out how to hold them accountable, especially when they continually use their platform to inspire things that might not be all right for our community. So I'll stop there because I keep going.
Okay.
Well, I teach a civil rights course at Lehman College, and I believe in equal representation under the law, and that speaks to that. You know, I believe that every group needs that the representative behave fairly, and that they represent everybody in the community. So that goes for anybody that goes to any legislative body. So that's how I feel about that issue. I think we go over there to represent everybody and try to represent those who have not been represented, actually. So that's my approach to that.
I really appreciate this question, Steve, because it is no secret that, you know, here in our community, we, for example, had the biggest shift toward folks voting Republican in the last presidential election, and the last two. And, you know, we have a growing conservative base, right? And I have to agree that we have to talk to every single one of our neighbors. If we shut off debate, if we shut off dialogue, then we're never gonna get anywhere, right? In terms of changing hearts and minds. And for me, that's the approach that we need to have is, you know, I have this pretty corny saying that it's like, if I knew what you knew and you knew what I knew, then we would have really, really great productive conversations and probably like agree on most things. But there's so many differences of perspectives because we all have such different lived experiences. Even in a community where we're all, you know, so many of us are Dominican, so many of us are immigrant. We're still coming from so many different places and walks of life. And, you know, for me, growing up in the Catholic Church, going to Catholic school, right, and then going to college and being exposed to more and different, you know, perspectives and things like that, you know, that is something that I want to make sure that I am just completely respectful of everybody and where they're coming from, and trying to have that be the starting point to then go on to have more conversation. And one thing I will say about, you know, many of the conversations that we are having is that when we start from that common ground, right? When we start from the, how many food distributions did you do this week? You know, how many neighbors have you helped, you know, with this or that? And how many constituent cases have you done like this, right? We share so much, and it is about bridging that divide with true, genuine dialogue that is based in love and that is based in respect.
Thank you. And that's time. Is there any, one other question about defunding the police? Someone asked if you're interested in defunding the police. Maybe just raise your hand if you want to take away money from the police budget. Okay, all three. What about working with the police and supporting the police in the area?
I'm sorry. I just, this is a very hard litmus test question. Like this is one of the most complicated things for us,
Yeah.
I think, in our community. And I would just say, speaking on my own behalf, you know, I look forward to coming to what a reimagined public safety looks like for members of our community with members of our community.
Well,
Right?
good
Because it looks
policing,
very different.
good policing and low crime are not mutually exclusive. We can have both. We can have both. And that's what I believe. We can have good relations with the police, and we can have a police that also is held accountable. That's what I believe.
Oh, it looks like we should have really saved time for that
Yeah,
question.
that's a good one.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that. I mean, you want to keep going?
There's a lot of Dominican cops, isn't there? A good number.
There should be, because Dominican. This is the Bronx is the next Dominican Republic. You know, a third of the Bronx is Dominican. So yes, there's a lot of Dominican cops, and there should be more.
Yeah, I agree. We don't. This is like this is his own debate topic, especially in this district. And we're talking about reinvestment. We're talking about just affirming the needs of our communities, I think there's a lot of limitations to what policing can get us. Policing is not going to solve all of the root causes of inequities that exist in the Bronx. And I think that we have to have a real conversation what that looks like and how we interact with policing. But I think at the end of the day, it has to be rooted in investment for our people first, so we can have everything that we need and not just adding more security cameras and thinking that shaking hands with police all over the concourse is going to solve all of the crises in this district.
Well, listen, we invite all of the candidates, every candidate running for office is invited to submit an op-ed to us at PoliticsNY to have your voice heard even further. So we encourage the candidates to do that. And Fernando and Pierina, I've done my 3 questions in 3 minutes with you. Adolfo, I look forward to doing it with you, but anything to amplify your message. So continue to tag us on social media, because that's what we are trying to do with Schneps Media and PoliticsNY. We're trying to get your messages out to as many people as possible to encourage everyone to come out and vote and be educated and be involved. So thank you so much to you candidates. Good luck.
All have my respect. I know you're all putting yourself out there, so
Thank you.
all the best. to you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you.
Thank you for doing this. It was very good.
Thank you to our live audience. And again, you can catch this on YouTube, PoliticsNY, on our website, Schneps, everything. We're just going to try and amplify and amplify and amplify. So thank you again, everyone.
Good job. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.